Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start by taking a look at the day's headlines. Japan officially removed South Korea from its whitelist of trading partners. Hope for a reversal in tensions remains low, but Seoul says it could rethink its withdrawal from an intel sharing pact with Tokyo if the export curbs are retracted. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wades back into the North Korea impasse, blaming the lack of progress on the regime's rogue behavior. No treading on eggshells from Pompeo, who the North has called a poisonous plant of US diplomacy. Plus, with fires threatening the Amazon rainforest, precious time could be lost as the leaders of Brazil and France engage in some verbal mudslinging. As they stubbornly stand their ground, a big aid package from the G7 remains in limbo. So it is official, the deed is done. Today, Wednesday, August 28th, is the day Japan removes South Korea from its whitelist of trusted trading partners, dealing a major blow to South Korean firms and, of course, the wider economy as a whole. The removal came at the stroke of midnight 10 hours ago. The move, although being known about for weeks now, is expected to further damage the already fragile ties between the two neighbours. Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Japan's Trade Minister Hiroshige Seko said that Tokyo will go ahead with its plan to take Seoul off its whitelist of trusted trading partners as planned. Seko told reporters on Tuesday after a cabinet meeting that the Japanese government will carry out the plan, denying criticism that the move is intended to harm the South Korean economy. He reiterated that the decision is part of its plan to properly manage export controls, not meant to impact relations between Seoul and Tokyo. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga also said in a briefing that the revised export control order will go into effect on Wednesday. Earlier, South Korean Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun said Seoul may reconsider its decision to end the military intelligence sharing pact with Tokyo if Japan retracts its trade curbs on the country. Suga said the two matters cannot be linked together. Japan implemented exports restrictions on 3 key high-tech materials used in semiconductors back in July and decided to exclude South Korea off its whitelist of preferential trading partners in August. Although Japan denies it, the act is widely seen as retaliation against last year's ruling by the South Korean Supreme Court on victims of forced labor during the Japanese colonial rule. Once removed from the whitelist, Japanese exporters have to get the case-by-case approval from the government every 6 months instead of every 3 years to ship items classified as strategic goods to South Korea. The approval may take about 90 days for non-whitelist countries, while it usually takes about a week for whitelist countries. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, South Korea will invest more than $4 billion over 3 years starting 2020 for the steady supply and commercialization of local parts, materials and equipment as part of efforts to reduce dependency on Japan. The decision was made this morning during a meeting between the officials from the ruling party, government and Blue House, where they reviewed measures implemented following Tokyo's trade retaliation. They also agreed to select 100 key strategic items that are heavily reliant on Japan or need to develop homegrown tech for R&D projects by the end of this year. In addition, they vowed to swiftly implement projects that can skip preliminary feasibility tests, and they'll create a special committee to oversee R&D activities and policies. The South Korean government has revealed it could reconsider its termination of Seoul's military intel sharing pact with Japan should Tokyo withdraw its trade curbs. The remarks came on Tuesday during a meeting among senior officials from the government, the ruling party and the top office. Also discussed was next year's budget, which is set to rise by around 9% compared to this year. Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea has hinted that it could reconsider its decision to pull out of its military intel sharing pact with Japan should Tokyo take appropriate action. Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun made the remarks during a high-level meeting between the ruling party government and the presidential office on Tuesday to discuss follow-up measures to Japan's trade curbs. He said that maintaining GSOMIA is no longer in the country's interest after Tokyo removes Seoul from its list of trusted trading partners.
There's almost 3 months left before GSOMIA expires on November 23rd. There's room for reconsideration should Japan lift its export curbs and come to the negotiating table.
The three sides also agreed on the need for an expansionary budget for next year to tackle the headwinds facing the country, including Tokyo's trade retaliation. The 2020 budget plan, which will be finalized on Thursday, is expected to amount to over $420 billion, a hike of about 9% on year. Of that, more than $1.6 billion will be set aside to help local industries cope with Japan's trade curbs.
If there's a word to describe the conditions facing the South Korean economy, it's uncertainty. The 2020 budget will be the basis for the country to overcome downside economic risks, tackle Japan's export curbs, and step up industrial competitiveness.
And with a regular session of the National Assembly set to kick off in September, they called for cooperation from the opposition bloc to work on pending bills related to people's livelihoods, as well as next year's government budget.
During the final regular session of the 20th National Assembly, our focus will be taking care of people's livelihoods. We have a lot on our plate, including government interpellation sessions, state audits, as well as deliberating pending bills. We'll also do our best to smoothly pass the budget bill to revive the economy.
The three sides said their utmost priority is reviving the economy and dealing with Japan's trade curbs, vowing close cooperation between Parliament and the government to bring about positive changes the people can feel. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, hundreds of Japanese people have taken to the streets of Tokyo to demand the Abe government renounce its removal of South Korea from its list of trusted trade partners. A Japanese civic group on Tuesday gathered in front of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's official residence, expressing their deep opposition to Tokyo's trade restrictions on South Korean firms. They also slammed Abe's lack of remorse on sensitive historical issues, including Japan's wartime recruitment of forced laborers, and they called on the Japanese government to face up to its past wrongdoings. Signs at the rally read "No Abe" and called on the Japanese leader to stop using economic methods as a means of retaliation over historical issues. Now, Japan's removal of South Korea from its whitelist has become a reality, and it's casting an even darker shadow over Seoul-Tokyo relations. However, as a series of global events are scheduled for the leaders of both countries over the coming weeks and months, watchers say there's at least a flicker of hope the two sides can reach some kind of compromise to potentially, hopefully, diffuse their trade spat. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
With the Japanese government set for a reshuffle early next month, all eyes are on how Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's new-look cabinet might lead to a positive shift away from the currently frosty relations between Seoul and Tokyo. Analysts say Foreign Minister Taro Kono could be replaced, as he was not deemed influential in Tokyo's export curbs on Seoul. They also forecast a shakeup of hardliners within Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. President Moon Jae-in and Prime Minister Abe are scheduled to be in New York on September 17th as the 74th UN General Assembly kicks off. It's left to be seen whether they will sit down for a bilateral summit, as they did last year. On October 22nd, the coronation of new Japanese Emperor Naruhito is expected to take place, to which Tokyo has invited the leaders of some 190 countries. It's left to be seen whether President Moon will attend the official dinner hosted by Abe. The ASEAN Plus 3, which includes South Korea, Japan, and China, will be held in Thailand in late October, while the Chile APEC Summit is scheduled for November 16th. As a slew of global events are scheduled in the coming months, watchers have expressed hope that some personal interaction between the leaders could help alleviate the escalating tensions between the two Asian nations. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Japan has asked South Korea to provide evidence to back up its concerns over contaminated water from the 2011 Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown potentially being discharged into the Pacific Ocean. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, the economic minister from the Japanese embassy in South Korea delivered a diplomatic note on Tuesday in response to Seoul's request the previous day for clarification of Tokyo's disposal plans. To this, the South Korean government said it's delivering rational concerns based on scientific facts. It also stressed the issue should be dealt with in a way that does not affect the citizens of either country or the ecosystem surrounding the nuclear plant. In other news, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is blaming North Korea's rogue behavior for the stall in negotiations on dismantling the regime's nuclear weapons program. This comes as Britain, France and Germany have condemned the regime. They did so at the UN Security Council for the regime's recent missile launches. And this is the second time those three countries have done that in less than 1 month. Lee-Seung-jae with the details.
In a speech at the National Convention of the American Legion in Indianapolis on Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hit out at North Korea's rogue behavior amid stalled talks on dismantling the regime's nuclear weapons program. While Pompeo stressed that the U.S. has galvanized global support to denuclearize North Korea, he stopped short of mentioning the international sanctions that are on the regime. The talks have stalled since the two sides failed to agree to Washington's demands for complete denuclearization and Pyongyang's demands for sanctions relief during the second Trump-Kim summit in Hanoi earlier this year. Last week, North Korea's Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho slammed Pompeo, calling him the die-hard toxin of U.S. diplomacy, and adding the U.S. would be sadly mistaken if it planned to maintain sanctions on the North. Despite the verbal tit-for-tat, Washington has continued to express hope that Pyongyang will return to the negotiating table, in line with a June 30th agreement between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. In New York on Tuesday, Britain, France, and Germany condemned North Korea's recent missile launches in a statement issued after a closed-door session of the UN Security Council. The three countries were referring to the regime's 7 rounds of missile tests since late July. It's the second time the countries have condemned the North in less than a month. The statement urges Pyongyang to engage in meaningful negotiations with the U.S., adding that international sanctions must remain in place and be fully and strictly enforced until North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs are dismantled. The U.S. did not sign to either of the statements, possibly in a bid to avoid any action that could hurt efforts to resume denuclearization talks with the regime. Lee-Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, US-based North Korean monitoring website 38 North has expressed concerns over signs that suggest the North is continuing to produce highly enriched uranium for nuclear weapons. Based on commercial satellite images, 38 North explained Wednesday that an additional accumulation of waste has been spotted from the Pyeongsan uranium mine and concentration plant since 2017. It also said the facility, which is the North's largest uranium mine and concentration plant, has been in operation through late May to support the North's nuclear program. Now, China says it's unaware of any phone calls taking place between Washington and Beijing over the weekend, despite what US President Donald Trump claimed at the end of the G7 summit in France. This rebuttal came a day after Trump said on Monday that China had called top US trade officials asking to resume talks on a trade deal. US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also said there had been contact between the two sides, but did not specify with whom. China's foreign ministry said Tuesday that it has not heard of any phone calls made between the two governments regarding their trade spat. Instead, it criticized the Trump administration for increasing tariffs on China's exports to the US, calling it a measure of extreme pressure that is not constructive and purely harmful to both sides. Now, international action to fight the fires in the Amazon rainforest are being delayed as Brazil and France continue to clash over aid from the G7. In fact, Brazil's leader has refused to accept the offer of aid unless he receives an apology from his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Kim Dami. So, Dami, tell us more.
Right, Mark. On top of rejecting the $20 million emergency aid offer from G7 countries, Brazil is slamming the gesture as colonialist. According to AFP, a top Brazilian official mocked French President Emmanuel Macron, saying Macron cannot avoid a foreseeable fire in a church that's a World Heritage Site. That's referring to the devastating fire that destroyed most of the iconic Notre Dame Cathedral in April. The official added that Macron should take care of his home and his colonies. Brazil's rejection comes after the French leader accused his Brazilian counterpart of lying about fighting climate change. Jair Bolsonaro has urged Macron to apologize for insulting him by calling him a liar. The Brazilian government initially welcomed the G7's offer, but later changed its mind, citing France's disrespect towards Brazil's sovereignty. While the two sides argued, the world's largest tropical rainforest is burning down, with the highest number of fires this year since 2013. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is urging the U.S. to lift the sanctions on his country first before Tehran can actually consider holding talks with Washington. The Iranian leader said Tuesday it was up to President Trump to make the next move, adding Washington holds the key to positive developments. His comments come a day after Trump said he was open to a meeting if the circumstances are right. Tensions between the U.S. and Iran have escalated ever since the Trump administration pulled out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal last year and reinstated sanctions. Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests have reached their 80th day, surpassing its 2014 Umbrella Revolution as the longest protest in Hong Kong's history. The protests, which began on June 9th, have seen hundreds of thousands of protesters take to the streets week after week to demonstrate against the extradition bill proposed by the Hong Kong government, as well as other issues such as police brutality. There is also no end in sight to the protest, with another major demonstration planned for this weekend. With school back in session this week, students are also planning to refuse to return.
Time now for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information that should be useful in your everyday life. Now, this year, there has been a growing number of people around the world, mostly in the US and European countries, taking DNA tests at home to find out not only their bloodline or ancestry, but also genetic factors that influence their health. I'm happy to say we have our Oh Soo-young in the studio, who's going to fill us in on what kind of useful services are available. And Soo-young, I hear you've actually taken one of these DNA tests yourself.
That's right, I did indeed. And in fact, as you said, these DNA tests taken at home are becoming something of a trend around the world lately. And it's estimated that more than 70 million people around the world have taken these direct-to-consumer DNA tests. And that's compared to the 12 million people earlier in 2018. And after seeing some reviews on social media, as I said, I decided to take one myself. You can order the test online from a handful of companies that offer these test kits. And it's quite straightforward. You take a saliva sample, post it off, and that's it.
Okay, so what you do is you essentially spit into a test tube and then post it off to one of these companies that tests the DNA, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, yes, yeah. That's the literal way of putting it,
okay.
Yes.
So how long does it take to get the results? And more importantly, what did you find out about yourself?
Well, it takes about a month to get the test results back.
Yeah.
It took me about 3 weeks, actually, and so that was rather fast. But what most people are curious about is their ethnicity rather than their health stats. So these tests, they trace how much of a certain ethnicity is in your DNA. I took 2 tests, actually, one in Korea and one in America, and both have said that I'm mostly South Korean, so that doesn't really come as much of a surprise. But they also trace my ancestry to Northern Europe, Nepal, and South America, which I definitely wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Right, so on some platforms, you can actually connect to other users that share some of your genes, meaning that they could actually be distant relatives. I actually found a third cousin who was adopted, and she actually grew up in the US, so that was quite fascinating.
So do they actually provide you with their contact details as
They
well?
don't give you their contact details, but you can message them through that platform.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yes, the exchange has been quite, intermittent because I don't always log on to the platform,
Yeah.
but it's nice to, know that they're out there, I suppose.
Yeah.
And another major use of DNA home kits is health and wellness. So the tests pick up certain genetic traits, such as whether you're prone to blushing from drinking alcohol, whether you like the smell of cilantro, which I definitely do, whether you are likely to develop diabetes and other illnesses as well.
Okay, so this is good then, because it isn't just about if you're curious about something, there is actually some practical use out of this. You can see if you might be predisposed to any genetic conditions, perhaps. Now, what kind of different products and services are available here in South Korea?
Well, given Korea's relatively strict regulations on DNA usage and information as well, local companies are actually quite limited in what they can provide right now. But the government is working on easing regulations. And some of the services that I've actually tried, they were a meal planning service and a cosmetics service based on your DNA results. And as for the health service, the catering service, they look at your cholesterol levels, metabolism, as well as skin elasticity, likelihood of skin discoloration, and hair thickness. So they try to come up with a perfect meal plan based on those pieces of information. They come up with various dishes that you can make at home. They offer advice on what kind of nutrients you should be consuming more, as well as some of the foods that you should avoid or cut down on. You can subscribe to a meal delivery service, actually, to have your customized meals brought to your door. I spoke to the CEO of the company, Grace Park, who elaborated on the benefits of having meals that complement your genetic makeup.
We live in a world where so many people as young as 30 years old are developing conditions such as cancer, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Based on your genetic makeup, you need to take care of your eating habits and environmental factors over the long run, as the impact will show up over time.
So as you can see, you can use your genetic information to optimize your health, and you can look after your skin as well. Another company I contacted has been developing skincare products based on DNA information. It takes about 10 days to analyze your data, and the company suggests solutions based on your stats on skin elasticity, discoloration, as well as aging.
Customers seeking brand value or products that offer benefits for all are a thing of the past. We, on the other hand, offer a wide range of products developed for each individual customer. For instance, our skincare products contain elements that curb the genes that cause rapid aging, loss of skin elasticity, and skin discoloration.
So companies like these are pushing the government to ease regulations even more so that they can actually provide more specific services for their customers and come up with even more innovative ways to cater to your genetics.
Oh, okay, Soo-young, thank you very much for coming in with that information, and good for you taking the DNA test to find out a bit about your ancestry and whatnot. Thank you for coming in, and we hope to speak to you again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Certain parts of the country are seeing showers again, and especially those on Jeju Island have been seeing some strong downpours in recent days. Since Monday, the southern island has received 150 to 300 millimeters of torrential rain. And the showers on Jeju and southern coastal regions should let up by this afternoon, but there will be another band of rain tomorrow afternoon. In total, it could be about another 150 millimeters through Thursday night. The rest of southern Korea will see 5 to 40 millimeters. And for a closer look at the next 24 hours, parts of the east will see passing showers this afternoon. Meanwhile, central regions, including Seoul, will see another band of rain tomorrow morning. Temperature-wise, central regions will be as warm as yesterday, while southern provinces will notice a big jump in readings this afternoon. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's where we're going to have to leave the news and weather for now. Stay tuned to Arirang TV and we'll have our next newscast coming up at noon Korea time. So until then, goodbye.
Overseas TV Audience Survey. Arirang TV, KISDI, and Gallup Korea are conducting research on viewer opinions. Your honest answers will be used for the development of Arirang TV. From August 12th to September 20th, you can participate